"I can't believe this," shouted the millionaire when he saw what his new wife had done to his daughter. If this story interested you, subscribe to our channel and tell us what city you're watching from. Let's begin. On a typical sunny Miami morning, the Miami Cultural Institute opened its doors for a charity event that brought together entrepreneurs, politicians, and local celebrities. The grand ballroom, with its crystal chandeliers and view of Biscayne Bay, welcomed the cream of Miami society, with glasses of champagne and canapes served by impeccably dressed waiters. At the center of attention, a decorated stage awaited the presentation of the A Full Childhood Project, an initiative aimed at assisting children in vulnerable situations. Deborah Santana nervously adjusted the navy blue name tag on her simple dress, feeling out of place among so many designer outfits and glittering jewelry. At 42, with 2 decades of work as a social worker in Miami's less affluent neighborhoods, she was well acquainted with the contrast between the glamour of that environment and the raw reality she faced daily. She took a deep breath, mentally reviewing the main points of her presentation. "Deborah, I'm so glad you made it." The voice of Gregory Mendez, the Institute's director and her longtime friend, interrupted her thoughts. "We're almost ready to start. There are a lot of important people here today, you know. This project might finally get the funding it deserves." She smiled, trying to share his enthusiasm, but something caught her attention out of the corner of her eye. In the side garden, partially visible through the French doors, a girl of about 7 was slowly backing away, holding a glass of juice. In front of her, an elegant woman, dressed entirely in white, wore a poorly disguised expression of irritation. The glass trembled in the child's hand. "Are you listening to me?" Greg followed her gaze, intrigued. "Sorry," Deborah murmured. "Just a minute." Driven by a professional instinct honed by years of dealing with signs of domestic violence, she walked discreetly toward the doors. The scene unfolding seemed ordinary. A child had spilled juice on an adult's dress. But what made Deborah stop were the girl's eyes wide, dominated by a fear that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "Look what you've done." "Sophia," the woman hissed, maintaining a social smile on her lips while subtly squeezing the girl's wrist. "Now let's go to the restroom and clean up this mess you've made." Sophia, with her curly hair tied back in a flawless bow, didn't answer. Her small tan face was frozen, in an expression Deborah knew all too well. The silent terror of someone who fears consequences invisible to others. Before she could get any closer, Greg appeared at her side. "Come on, Deborah. It's time for your presentation. The crew from WPLG Local 10 is already in position." Reluctantly, she moved away, but the image of the girl remained etched in her mind. Throughout her presentation, while she spoke about indicators of child abuse and protection strategies, her eyes scanned the ballroom, searching for the child. It was only during the cocktail reception that followed that Deborah saw her again, sitting alone in a corner, flipping through a colorful book. She approached casually, sitting on the same upholstered bench. "That book looks interesting," Deborah commented in a soft voice. Sophia looked up, cautious. Deborah noticed scrapes on the girl's knees and a reddish mark, like fingerprints near her wrist, partially hidden by the sleeve of her dress. "It was my real mum's," Sophia answered in a low voice. "She gave it to me before she went away." Deborah felt a tightness in her chest. "Do you like to read?" The girl nodded, relaxing a little. "I like the stories where people are happy in the end." "Me too," Deborah smiled. "My name is Deborah." "And yours?" "Sophia Allen," the girl replied, closing the book carefully. Sophia Allen Foster. The last name made Deborah freeze for a moment. Foster. Even in Miami, few people wouldn't recognize that name. Richard Foster was the owner of the largest tech company in the Southeast, with offices in 3 countries. His face frequently graced business magazines and charity events. "Sophia." "There you are." The voice cut through the conversation like a razor. The woman in white was approaching, her dress now impeccable with no sign of stains. Beside her, a tall man in a navy blue suit smiled distractedly. "Mommy Clarissa, Dad," Sophia murmured, getting up quickly. "I was just—" "Sophia needs to go home now, it's getting late," Clarissa Foster interrupted, placing a hand on the girl's shoulder with a firmness disguised as affection. Her cold eyes sized up Deborah from head to toe. "You are Deborah Santana, a social worker. I just presented the A Full Childhood Project. Richard Foster extended his hand with a tired but genuine smile. "Ah, yes, I've heard great things. Unfortunately, we missed your presentation. We had to deal with a small incident." He cast a quick glance at his wife, who maintained an impassive expression. "Nothing serious," Clarissa added, adjusting the bow in Sophia's hair with mechanical movements. "Just a ruined dress. Children, you know how they are." Deborah noticed how Sophia flinched slightly at her stepmother's touch. "Of course," she replied, keeping her tone professional. "Mr. Foster, your daughter has a very special book here." Richard looked at the volume in Sophia's hands as if noticing it for the first time. Something in his face softened. "It was her mother's. Caroline loved children's stories even before—" His voice trailed off. "We need to go," Clarissa insisted, already pulling Sophia by the hand. "It was a pleasure, Ms. Santana." Deborah watched the three of them walk away, a chill running down her spine with the familiar feeling that something was deeply wrong in that family. Sophia looked back once, her large eyes filled with a sadness no child should ever know. In the following days, the image of Sophia wouldn't leave Deborah's mind. After a few discreet phone calls, she found out the girl studied at St. Teresa's Academy, one of the most traditional and expensive institutions in Miami. A visit to the school, under the pretext of a lecture on child protection, allowed Deborah to meet Mrs. Louisa Barton, Sophia's homeroom teacher. "She's changed so much in the last few months," Louisa confided when Deborah casually mentioned the student's name after the lecture. They were alone in the teacher's lounge, and the educator seemed relieved to be able to unburden herself. Sophia was always a cheerful, participative child. Now she barely speaks, gets startled by any loud noise, and hardly interacts with her classmates. "Since when did you notice this change?" Deborah asked, keeping her tone casual as her brain registered every detail. "After her father remarried about a year ago." Louisa lowered her voice, even though they were alone. "Her biological mother passed away in a car accident 2 years ago. It was very traumatic for Sophia. She was in the vehicle too." Deborah's stomach sank. "Does she get hurt often?" Louisa hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "Last week she came in with a bruised arm. Said she fell down the stairs at home, but—" She stopped, biting her lip. "But—" The mark looked more like a grip. "5 fingers." Louisa shook her head. "Look, I can't keep talking about this. The Foster family is important. They're major benefactors of the school. If they find out I understand your concern," Deborah assured her, handing her a card. "If you notice anything else, you can call me, confidentially." In the following weeks, Deborah conducted a careful investigation. She documented every new bruise that appeared on Sophia, every time the girl arrived at school without having had breakfast, every episode of isolation reported by Louisa in discreet messages. The most valuable piece of the puzzle came from an unexpected source, Mrs. Elliott, the cook at the Fosters' mansion. The meeting took place at the Bayside Market, where Deborah did her shopping on Saturdays. She recognized the cook from a photo Louisa had shown her from Mother's Day at the school. A 60-year-old black woman with graying hair tied in a bun was carefully selecting fruit at a stall. "Excuse me, you're Mrs. Elliott, aren't you? From the Foster's house." The woman eyed her with suspicion. "Who's asking?" Deborah introduced herself, carefully explaining her genuine concern for Sophia. After some initial hesitation, Mrs. Elliott agreed to have coffee in the food court. There, amidst the bustle of shoppers, the cook opened up. "That woman doesn't like the girl," she murmured, looking around to make sure she wouldn't be overheard. "Treats her like a burden, a nuisance. When Mr. Richard isn't home, she sends Sophia to her room without dinner for the smallest thing. Once she locked her in there for a whole day because the little one spilled milk on the table." "And the father?" "He travels a lot. When he's home, Mrs. Clarissa is a different person. So affectionate, concerned. He doesn't see what happens when he turns his back." Mrs. Ilya sighed heavily. "I hide food in the girl's room. Fruit, cookies, whatever I can. She's told me she gets very hungry at night. Has Sophia ever tried to talk to her father?" Once, I think. But Mrs. Clarissa convinced him it was all fantasy, that Sophia was making up stories out of jealousy. The cook clutched the cup between her wrinkled hands. "He wants to believe his wife, you know. It's easier." Deborah nodded, familiar with that dynamic. "Mrs. Ilya, if you notice anything more serious, let me know immediately." She handed her the card. "Anything." On her way home, Deborah called her friend Anthony Nash, a lawyer specializing in children's and adolescents' rights. They had worked together on dozens of cases over the years, forming an effective partnership in protecting at-risk minors. "Tony, I need your help," she explained, summarizing the situation as she drove through Miami's busy streets. "It's a powerful family. We need to be very careful." "Got it," he replied. "I'll check if there's any legal history involving the stepmother. In the meantime, keep documenting everything. We need solid evidence before making any official move." As the investigation progressed discreetly, Deborah sought more information about Clarissa Foster. A conversation with a journalist friend, Rafael Torres, revealed a disturbing detail. Before marrying Richard, Clarissa Menzies, her maiden name, had lived in Atlanta, where she was investigated for mistreating her ex-partner's son. The case, however, had been dismissed for lack of evidence. "How did she manage to hide that?" Deborah asked, incredulous. Rafael shrugged. "Money and influence make a lot of things easier in this country." And the file was sealed. "Technically, I shouldn't even have access to this information." The tension escalated when Louisa reported that the school principal had questioned her frequent visits to Sophia's classroom during breaks. "They said I'm overly involved. I received an informal warning," the teacher explained, visibly nervous. "I think Clarissa said something to the administration." "Stay calm," Deborah advised. "We can't alert them to our investigation. Keep observing Sophia, but be more discreet." On a rainy Thursday morning, Deborah received an urgent call from Louisa. Sophia had arrived at school in a state of agitation, refusing to go home. Through tears, she told the teacher that Mommy Clarissa had found out that people were asking questions, and was furious. The girl feared that Mrs. Elia, her only ally in the house, would be fired because of her. "She's terrified," Louisa whispered over the phone. "But the principal has already called her parents to come pick her up." "Deborah, we have to do something now." "Don't let anyone take Sophia before I get there," Deborah instructed, already grabbing her car keys. "I'm going to notify Child Protective Services and call Anthony to arrange for an emergency protection order." Deborah's heart pounded as she drove through Miami's slippery streets. The rain fell in dense sheets, hampering visibility. She thought of Sophia, of her large, frightened eyes, of the fear she carried daily. She thought of how many other children lived in similar situations, protected by the cloak of power and social silence. In her mind, the decision was already made. No matter how powerful the Foster family was, that girl would not continue to suffer. Not as long as Deborah could do something about it. Arriving at the school, she found a tense situation. Clarissa Foster was already there, speaking with the principal in a low but firm tone. Sophia remained in the classroom with Louisa, who had refused to hand her over until Deborah arrived. Anthony showed up minutes later, accompanied by a CPS caseworker, Paula Moore. "I got a restraining order," Anthony whispered, showing her the document. "Temporary, but enough to stop them from taking her today. We've requested an immediate psychological evaluation." When Deborah entered the principal's office, the air seemed to freeze. Clarissa stared at her with a mixture of surprise and controlled fury. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, turning to the principal. "What is this social worker doing here?" "Mrs. Foster, I'm Deborah Santana from the Specialized Social Services Center," she introduced herself formally, keeping her voice steady. "We are here due to a report of possible mistreatment of Sophia." "This is absurd." Clarissa stood up, her face pale with rage. "Who made this ridiculous accusation? Was it that meddling teacher, wasn't it? Or that ungrateful maid who—" "The source of the report is confidential," Anthony intervened, presenting the restraining order. "This document stipulates that Sophia will remain under protection until a full assessment is conducted." The principal seemed torn between the fear of displeasing an important benefactor and her legal duty. "Mrs. Foster, I'm sorry, but we must comply with the court order." Clarissa picked up her phone, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm calling my husband and our lawyer. This isn't over." While the argument unfolded, Sophia was discreetly taken by Paula to a CPS facility, where she would be interviewed by a specialized psychologist, Dr. Mariana Costa. Louisa accompanied the girl, trying to calm her during the ride. "Will I have to go back home after this?" Sophia asked, her small voice almost inaudible over the sound of the rain on the car roof. "Not today, sweetie," Paula answered gently. "Today you're going to stay in a safe place. where they'll take good care of you. That night, as Sophia slept in a temporary shelter under court protection, the storm that had formed was not just the one battering the streets of Miami. A whirlwind of accusations, legal threats and backroom maneuvering was unfolding. The Foster's law firm filed a motion to revoke the restraining order, claiming unfounded persecution and violation of family rights. Deborah, exhausted but determined, met with Anthony in his small, cluttered office. The rain continued to fall outside, drumming rhythmically against the windows. "They have power, Deborah," Anthony warned, flipping through the case documents. "And they're not sparing any resources to quash this. We have evidence, Tony. We have the school reports, Mrs. Elia's testimony, the documented bruises, Clarissa's history in Atlanta, which was sealed and we technically can't use," he reminded her. "Besides, they've already started the smear campaign. Did you see what came out on August Miller's blog?" Deborah took the tablet he offered. On the screen, an opinion piece insinuated that certain social work professionals were conducting ideological witch hunts against traditional Miami families. Her name wasn't mentioned directly, but anyone involved would understand the reference. "I don't care about that," she declared, handing back the tablet. "I care about Sophia, about what will happen to her when all the cameras turn off and the doors close." Before Anthony could respond, Deborah's phone rang. It was an unknown number, she answered cautiously. "Deborah Santana?" The male voice on the other end sounded tense, urgent. "Yes, who is this?" "Richard Foster. We need to talk now." Deborah looked at Anthony, who raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Mr. Foster, I believe any conversation should take place with the presence of—" "Don't involve anyone else," Richard interrupted. "This is about my daughter. Only my daughter. I'm in my car in front of your office, please." The desperate tone in the businessman's voice made her hesitate. "I'll be down in 5 minutes." Anthony grabbed her arm as she stood up. "Are you sure? It could be a trap. He's the father, Tony. If there's a chance to resolve this—" She grabbed her purse. "Stay on standby. If I don't call in an hour, call the police." The rain had lessened to a fine drizzle when Deborah left the building. A luxurious black car was parked at the curb, its engine running. She approached cautiously, seeing the silhouette of Richard Foster in the driver's seat. He got out when he saw her, his eyes red and swollen. "Get in, please," he asked, opening the passenger door. "I need you to hear what I have to say." Deborah took a deep breath and got into the vehicle, smelling the new leather and the warmth of the heater. What Richard would say next would change the course of this story forever. Behind the wheel, the businessman looked as if he had aged 10 years since the charity event. His hands trembled slightly as he held the steering wheel, and a stubble shadowed his usually impeccable face. "Mr. Foster," Deborah began, "I hope you understand the gravity of the situation and—" "I saw it," he interrupted, his voice hoarse. "This morning. I came back early from a trip. I didn't tell anyone. I wanted to surprise Sophia." He swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the windshield where the drizzle formed erratic patterns. Her bedroom light was on even though it was so early. "When I opened the door," his voice broke. Deborah waited, her heart racing. Clarissa was there holding Sophia by the arm, yelling at her. Richard closed his eyes for a moment as if trying to erase the image. "My daughter." Her face. I've never seen so much fear in a child's eyes. "What did you do?" Deborah asked softly. "I screamed. I exploded." Clarissa tried to explain, to say that Sophia had broken a vase on purpose, that she was being rebellious. He shook his head. "But I saw it in my daughter's eyes. She was terrified, Deborah, terrified in her own home." The silence hung heavy between them for a few moments, broken only by the soft swish of the windshield wipers. "Why are you telling me this?" Richard turned to face her. "Because you were right. Because I was blind. Because I let my daughter suffer while I—" His voice choked. "I need your help. I need to know how to protect Sophia now, how to fix what I allowed to happen." Deborah felt a wave of relief mixed with determination. "First, you need to withdraw the legal action against the protection order. Then we will work together to ensure Sophia receives all the psychological support she needs." "I'll do whatever it takes," Richard assured her. "Anything to have my daughter back, to see her smile again." As they discussed the next steps, the rain stopped completely, leaving the air washed and fresh. A new day was beginning in Miami, bringing with it the promise of change. For Sophia, for her. "Father, And for all the children who, like her, suffered silently in the shadows of seemingly perfect homes, the following weeks were a time of intense transformation for everyone involved. After the night of his confession in the car, Richard Foster made a series of decisions that surprised Miami society. The first was to temporarily step down from the presidency of his company to dedicate himself fully to Sophia's recovery process. The second, equally impactful, was to initiate divorce proceedings against Clarissa. The news spread quickly through Miami's social circles. Clarissa, for her part, did not accept the situation passively. In a calculated move, she granted an exclusive interview to a local television channel, presenting herself as the victim of a conspiracy orchestrated by a resentful social worker and ungrateful, manipulative employees. With carefully rehearsed tears, she declared her unconditional love for Sophia and her devotion to the family that was being unjustly destroyed. "I am being persecuted for trying to set boundaries for a child who lost her mother," she claimed, delicately dabbing a tear with a silk handkerchief. "Any discipline is now seen as abuse. They want to turn parents into villains for raising their children." The interview divided public opinion. While some sympathized with the wronged stepmother, others, especially those who knew the behind the scenes of the case, recognized the manipulation strategy. Mrs. Elia, who had been fired by Clarissa days after the intervention by Child Protective Services, watched the interview with indignation on the small television in her home in the suburbs. "Shameless liar," she muttered to herself, phone already in hand to call Deborah. Meanwhile, Sophia remained in temporary custody at a foster home, receiving regular visits from her father and daily sessions with Dr. Mariana Costa, a psychologist specializing in childhood trauma. The first few days were difficult. The girl alternated between long periods of silence and crying spells, clutching the storybook from her biological mother as if it were a protective talisman. "She's showing clear symptoms of post-traumatic stress," Mariana explained to Deborah and Richard after a week of treatment. The constant fear she lived in created a chronic state of hypervigilance and anxiety. But there are positive signs. She's starting to trust again, especially her father. Richard, sitting in the office chair with a weary expression, nodded. "Yesterday she let me read a story to her, for the first time in I don't even know how long." "That's excellent," Mariana encouraged. "Small steps, Mr. Foster. Recovery isn't linear. There will be ups and downs. The important thing is the consistency of the support she's receiving now." Deborah, who was closely following the case despite the external pressures, felt a glimmer of hope. "And what about returning home?" "It's still too early," the psychologist mused. "We first need to establish a sense of security for Sophia, and that includes the certainty that she won't find her stepmother there." Richard ran a hand through his hair in a gesture of exhaustion. "I've filed for a protective order to prevent Clarissa from approaching Sophia or our house. My lawyers are handling it, but she has influential connections. And she's using all of them," Deborah added. August Miller's blog published another article yesterday, insinuating there's a hidden agenda behind Sophia's separation from her stepmother. "I don't care what they publish," Richard declared with surprising firmness. "I only care about my daughter." That determination was new, Deborah reflected. The first few times she had met the businessman, he had seemed constantly absent, immersed in his business, delegating his daughter's upbringing. Now there was an intensity in his gaze, a presence that had been missing before. While the legal and media battles unfolded, life at the foster home followed its routine. Sophia gradually began to interact with the other children. One of them in particular became her constant companion, Juliana, an 8-year-old girl who had also lost her mother. "They're inseparable," commented Thelma Rodriguez, the home's coordinator, during one of Deborah's visits. "Yesterday I found them in the garden, sharing stories about their mothers. It was the first time I saw Sophia speak openly about Caroline." Deborah smiled, watching the two girls through the window, sitting under a leafy mango tree. "Sometimes we need to find someone who understands our pain to begin to heal." That same day, upon returning to her office, Deborah found Anthony waiting with important news. "I got it," he announced, holding up a file folder. "The Atlanta case file. A friend at the courthouse there owes me a few favors." "How did you manage that?" "I thought it was sealed. Technically it is. Let's just say these are unofficial copies." He pushed the folder toward her. "Read it." The documents revealed a disturbing pattern. 5 years earlier, Clarissa Menzies had been accused of psychological abuse and neglect against the 9-year-old son of her then-partner, a local businessman. The case was dismissed after the child inexplicably withdrew his accusations. Shortly after, Clarissa moved to Miami. "This changes everything," Deborah murmured, feeling a chill. "It shows a pattern of behavior." "Exactly. And there's more." Anthony pointed to a name in the documents. "The lawyer who got the case dismissed and sealed? Edward Vance. He's now a partner at the firm representing Clarissa against you. We need to show this to the judge." "We can't use it officially," Anthony reminded her, "but we can use the information to direct our investigation. I'm going to try to locate the family in Atlanta, see if we can get an official statement." The situation took an even more complex turn when, days later, Deborah received an unexpected call. "I need to see you, urgent." The voice of Rafael Torres, the journalist, sounded tense. They met at a discreet cafe in the Coconut Grove neighborhood. Rafael seemed nervous, constantly looking around as he spoke in a low voice. "August Miller approached me," he revealed. "He wants me to write a piece on you. A sort of negative profile. Let me guess, insinuating I have a personal agenda against traditional families." Rafael nodded. "Worse, he has information about your past, Deborah. About Chicago." Deborah felt her blood run cold. Chicago was a chapter of her life that few people knew about. 15 years ago, before moving to Miami, she had faced a devastating personal situation involving her ex-husband, a violent man who had threatened her life after their separation. The case resulted in protective orders and her move to a new city. How did he get that? "I don't know, but he clearly has connections in the judiciary. He's suggesting that your obsession with Sophia's case is motivated by your own unresolved trauma." Raphael sighed heavily. "I refuse to write it, obviously, but he'll find someone who will." Deborah remained silent for a few moments, the cup of coffee forgotten between her hands. "This isn't going to stop me, Raphael." "I know. I just wanted you to be prepared." He hesitated before continuing. "I also found out something about Richard Foster that you need to know." "On the day of the accident that killed Caroline, Richard's wife?" "Yes. He was on a business trip. Actually, he was with Clarissa, who was already his assistant at the time. They started a relationship months before Caroline's death." The revelation landed like a bombshell. Deborah tried to process the information and its implications. "Do you think—" "I'm not suggesting anything," Raphael interrupted. "Just that there are layers to this story we don't know yet, and that Richard might not be as innocent as he seems now." The next morning, Deborah arrived at the foster home for a meeting with the multidisciplinary team monitoring Sophia. Raphael's information weighed on her mind, but she decided to keep it to herself until she better understood its implications. In the inner courtyard, she found Richard sitting on a bench watching Sophia play with Juliana. The two girls were drawing with colored chalk on the cement floor. "Good morning," Deborah greeted, sitting down beside him. Richard smiled faintly, without taking his eyes off his daughter. "She's smiling today. It's been so long since I've seen her smile like this." Deborah followed his gaze. Sophia did look different, lighter, as she explained something to Juliana, gesturing animatedly, almost like a normal 7-year-old should be. "Dr. Mariana says she's progressing well," Deborah commented. "Mr. Foster. Richard, please." "Richard," she corrected herself. "We need to talk about some sensitive issues, about the past." He finally turned to her, his expression suddenly tense. "What kind of issues?" Before Deborah could elaborate, they were interrupted by Thelma, the coordinator. "Sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation." Her tone was urgent. "Clarissa Foster is here. She's demanding to see Sophia." Richard stood up immediately. "How did she find out where we are?" "I don't know, but she brought a lawyer. They're claiming that since she's still legally married to you, and there's no final court decision on custody, she has the right to visits." Deborah also stood. "She can't enter without specific judicial authorization. This is a protective facility. The lawyer is threatening to call the police for obstruction of family contact," Thelma explained, visibly uncomfortable. Richard turned pale. "We can't let her see Sophia, not now. It would destroy all the progress. I'll handle this, Deborah stated firmly. Take Sophia. Inside, to Dr. Mariana's office. Thelma, please call Anthony immediately. As Richard and Thelma hurried away, Deborah walked to the foster home's reception area. There she found Clarissa, impeccably dressed in a light blue linen suit, next to a man in a dark suit whom she recognized as Edward Vance, the same lawyer from the Atlanta case. Mrs. Santana, Clarissa greeted with false cordiality. What a coincidence to find you here. I've come to visit my stepdaughter. Mrs. Foster, as you should know, Sophia is under a temporary protective order. Visits need to be pre-authorized by the judge and the psychological team. Edward Vance stepped forward. My client is legally married to the minor's father, and there is no specific judicial restriction against her. The protective order mentioned is generic and does not impede the right to family contact. Dr. Vance, Deborah replied, remaining calm. I suggest you review the Child Welfare Act. Sophia is under protection due to suspicion of domestic violence, and any contact must be supervised and approved by the technical team, considering the best interests of the child. This is outrageous, Clarissa exploded, momentarily dropping her serene facade. You're preventing a mother from seeing her daughter based on unfounded accusations. This is persecution. Mrs. Foster, the receptionist, a middle-aged woman with a firm expression, intervened. I must ask you to lower your voice. We have children in session. Clarissa took a deep breath, composing herself. I demand to see Sophia now, or I will call the police. Feel free, Deborah replied, holding out the reception phone. In fact, I suggest you ask for Detective Renata Oliver from the Special Victims Unit. She is fully aware of this case. The mention of the specialized detective made Edward Vance lightly touch his client's arm. Clarissa, perhaps we should reconsider our approach. We can formally request a hearing with the judge to establish a visitation schedule. No. Clarissa's voice rose again. I'm not leaving here without seeing Sophia. I have rights. At that moment, Anthony arrived, accompanied by a woman in formal attire whom Deborah recognized as Dr. Julianne Preston, the forensic psychologist appointed by the court to evaluate the case. Dr. Preston, Edward exclaimed, visibly surprised. I didn't expect to see you here today. I am conducting the psychological evaluation ordered by Judge Mauro Fonseca, she explained, with professional calm. And I must say, this interruption does not contribute to the therapeutic environment we are trying to establish for Sophia. I wasn't aware an evaluation was scheduled for today, Edward replied, quickly checking his electronic calendar. It was ordered on an urgent basis late yesterday afternoon, after we received the initial reports from the technical team. She turned to Clarissa. Mrs. Foster, I understand your desire to see the child, but at this moment, any unprepared contact could compromise both the evaluation process and Sophia's psychological well-being. Clarissa looked ready to protest again, but something in the psychologist's firm gaze stopped her. This is a conspiracy, she muttered, nervously adjusting the designer bag on her shoulder. You're all on the same side. No one is listening to my side of the story. On the contrary, Julianne replied serenely, I am here precisely to hear from all parties involved. In fact, I have an appointment scheduled to interview you tomorrow at 2 p.m. in my office. The information seemed to surprise Clarissa, who shot an inquisitive look at her lawyer. The notification must have arrived at the office this morning, Edward admitted, checking his phone again. I didn't have time to inform you before we came here. I suggest we use that formal meeting to discuss your concerns, Julianne continued, in an appropriate environment and within the established legal process. After a few moments of palpable tension, Clarissa finally relented. I'll be there tomorrow, she declared coldly. And I hope you all remember that I have rights in this situation too. When Clarissa and Edward finally left, Deborah felt her body relax, only then realizing how tense she had been. Thank you for the intervention. Dr. Preston, she said, extending a hand to the psychologist. Your arrival was providential. Actually, I've been here since early this morning, observing Sophia interact with the other children. Julianne smiled faintly. It's part of my evaluation method, observing when they aren't aware in addition to the formal interviews. And what have you observed so far? Anthony asked. Professionally, I cannot share preliminary conclusions, she replied, but I can say that I am forming a very clear picture of the situation. As they talked, Richard appeared in the reception area, his face still pale with worry. Are they gone? Deborah nodded. For now, yes, but we need to be prepared for new legal moves. Sophia is with Dr. Mariana, he informed them. Fortunately, she didn't realize what was happening. He turned to Julianne. Doctor, we need to talk about Caroline, about the accident. There are things I need to clarify. Julianne consulted her watch. I have an appointment scheduled for you at 3 p.m. today. We can talk then. When the psychologist moved away to continue her observations, Deborah and Richard were momentarily alone in the reception. What were you going to tell me before all this chaos? He asked. About issues from the past. Deborah hesitated. Raphael's revelation about the relationship between Richard and Clarissa before Caroline's death was too delicate to be addressed in that moment of crisis. We can talk about it later, she replied. Right now, the important thing is to ensure Sophia remains safe and calm. Richard nodded, but something in his eyes suggested he suspected what it might be about. Deborah, he said, his voice low and intense, I know there are still things you suspect about me, and you have every right to. I've made many mistakes. But I need you to know one thing. Never, not for a moment, did I stop loving my daughter, and I will do anything to protect her now. Before Deborah could respond, Thelma approached quickly. Sorry to interrupt, but Sophia is asking for her father. Richard immediately headed to the psychologist's office, leaving Deborah with her doubts and reflections. The social worker stood in the reception area for a few moments, observing the activity of the home, the children passing in the hallway, the professionals going about their daily routines. She thought of all the stories those walls had witnessed, of all the children who had passed through seeking protection. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Raphael. The story about you will be on Miller's blog tomorrow. Try to stop it, no luck. Be prepared. Deborah sighed deeply. The storm was just beginning, and there was still a long way to go. But as she heard Sophia's laughter echoing from somewhere inside the house, she knew that every battle was worth it. Some fights had to be fought, no matter how powerful the opponent. That night, as she worked late in her small apartment in Coconut Grove, organizing documentation for the upcoming hearing, Deborah received an unexpected visitor. The doorbell rang shortly after 10, and when she opened the door, she found Mrs. Elia, the Fosters' former cook, visibly agitated. Sorry to come so late. My dear, the woman said, entering hurriedly when invited, but I found out something you need to know. Something about the death of Caroline Allen. Deborah felt a shiver run down her spine. What did you find out, Mrs. Elia? The elderly lady sat on the sofa, politely refusing the offer of coffee. I have a niece who works at the clinic where Caroline was getting treatment. Psychiatric treatment, she added, lowering her voice as if the walls could hear. After you told me about the suspicions, I went to talk to her. What kind of treatment? Deborah asked, sitting next to the woman. Depression. Caroline suffered from severe depression after Sophia was born, but she was getting better, according to my niece. In the months before the accident, she seemed stronger, more determined. She had discovered something that had left her very disturbed. Richard's relationship with Clarissa, Deborah murmured. Mrs. Elia's eyes widened in surprise. How do you know? I have my sources too, Deborah replied. But please continue. Caroline scheduled an emergency appointment 2 days before the accident. She was agitated, talking about divorce, about taking Sophia far away. The doctor prescribed a sedative, but Mrs. Elia's voice faltered. On the day of the accident, the police found a very high dose of those medications in her system. They concluded she had taken them voluntarily. Are you suggesting it wasn't an accident? That Caroline? Deborah couldn't finish the sentence. I don't know what really happened, Mrs. Elia answered, wringing her wrinkled hands. But I knew Caroline since she was a young bride. That woman loved life, loved her daughter above all else. Even in the worst moments of her depression, Sophia was her safe harbor, her reason to keep going. Deborah processed the information in silence. If Caroline was determined to fight for custody of her daughter, the suicide theory became unlikely. And Sophia was in the car, Deborah recalled. If Caroline had planned something like that, she would never have put her daughter in danger, Mrs. Elia completed. Deborah, a new perspective began to form in Deborah's mind. one even darker than she had initially imagined. If it wasn't an accident or a suicide. "Mrs. Aaliyah, have you told anyone else about this?" The lady shook her head. "Only you. My niece could lose her job if they find out she talked about a patient. I understand. I'll need to investigate this discreetly. And please be careful. If your suspicions are founded, we're dealing with something much more dangerous than we thought." After seeing Mrs. Aaliyah to a taxi, Deborah returned to her apartment, her mind racing. She picked up the phone and dialed Anthony's number. "I need you to look up the official accident report for Caroline Allen," she requested without preamble. "Anything, witnesses, road conditions, toxicology reports." Now, Anthony's sleepy voice indicated he was already in bed. "It's urgent, Tony. I think we've found the real reason Clarissa is so desperate to regain control over Sophia. And it has nothing to do with maternal love." After hanging up, Deborah opened her laptop and began taking notes, connecting the dots of the intricate web she was uncovering. If her suspicions were correct, Sophia wasn't just a child suffering abuse at the hands of her stepmother. She was a witness. And as a witness, she represented a danger that Clarissa could not afford. The next morning, the article about Deborah was published as predicted. The insinuations were exactly what Raphael had anticipated: a social worker, traumatized by her own violent past, projecting her experiences onto the cases she handled. The text even suggested she had fabricated evidence in previous cases, though without citing concrete examples. But Deborah barely had time to be outraged by the attack on her reputation. A call from Thelma in the early hours of the morning turned her world upside down. "Deborah," the coordinator's voice was trembling, "Richard didn't show up for his scheduled visit. And we've just discovered that Sophia is not in her room." "What do you mean?" "Since when? We don't know for sure. She was last seen last night during dinner. We thought she was sleeping." Deborah's heart raced. "Have you called the police?" "Yes, they're on their way. But there's something strange. Juliana, her friend, says Sophia mentioned her dad was going to pick her up during the night for a special trip. Said it was a surprise." "My God," Deborah murmured. "Richard took her. But why?" "To protect her, or—" The doubt that had been planted in her mind the night before now bloomed in full force. If Richard was somehow involved in Caroline's death and feared the truth would come out— "I'm on my way," Deborah informed her, already grabbing her car keys. "Ask the police to issue an alert immediately." As she drove through the streets of Miami, Deborah tried calling Richard repeatedly. Every call went to voicemail. In desperation, she tried Anthony's number. "Richard has disappeared with Sophia," she informed him as soon as he answered. "Did you get the accident report?" "I'm looking at it now," Anthony replied. "And Deborah, there's something very strange here. Caroline's car was found at the bottom of a ravine on the road to Key Largo. The police concluded she lost control on a curve. But the forensics report mentions brake failure. Mechanical failure. Possibly. But the most interesting part is a note from the expert. Before the accident, Caroline had taken the car in for a checkup. She was worried about strange noises in the brake system. Deborah's blood ran cold. "Anthony, I think I know where Richard might have taken Sophia. The family had a beach house in Key Largo near the accident site. You think he's running? Or—" Deborah didn't want to verbalize what they both feared. "I'm heading there now." "Notify the police." The drive to Key Largo, normally just over an hour, seemed endless. Every passing minute heightened Deborah's anxiety. What was Richard planning to do? Was he trying to protect Sophia from Clarissa? Or was there something darker to his plans? When she finally reached the coastal town, the sun was already high in the sky. After asking a few locals, she located the Foster's Beach House, an elegant two-story building with a view of the ocean, partially hidden by lush vegetation. Richard's car was parked in the driveway. Deborah parked her own vehicle at a safe distance and called the local police, giving them her location. But the response she received was disheartening. The nearest patrol car would take at least 20 minutes to arrive. "I can't wait," she decided, hanging up the phone. Every minute could be crucial. With her heart pounding in her chest, Deborah approached the house. Through a side window, she saw Richard sitting in an armchair in the living room, apparently talking to someone out of her line of sight. There was no sign of Sophia. She hesitated for a moment, weighing her options. Confronting him directly could be dangerous, But her concern for Sophia outweighed any caution. Gathering her courage, Deborah walked to the front door and rang the bell. After a few moments of tense silence, she heard footsteps approaching. The door opened slowly, revealing the surprised face of Richard Foster. "Deborah, how did you find us? Where is Sophia?" she asked directly, trying to look over his shoulder into the house. Richard seemed confused. "She's fine. She's sleeping upstairs, exhausted from the trip." "Why did you take her from the foster home without authorization? You know that's a crime, Richard?" "I understand it looks irresponsible," he admitted, running a hand through his hair in a nervous gesture. "But after Clarissa's visit yesterday, I panicked. I was afraid she would find a way to take Sophia, or worse." "Worse how?" Deborah pressed. Richard hesitated, as if carefully measuring his next words. "There are things about Clarissa you don't know yet. Things I've recently discovered that made me fear not just for Sophia, but for both of us." Deborah felt a chill. "What things, Richard?" "We'd better talk inside," he suggested, opening the door wider. "Please." Deborah hesitated. Entering the house could be dangerous, but staying outside, not knowing what was happening with Sophia, was equally unbearable. "The police are on their way," she informed him, deciding to reveal this information as a precaution. "They know I'm here." Richard nodded slowly. "Understandable, and probably for the best. There's a lot I need to explain, and not just to you." When Deborah finally entered the house, she had no idea she was about to discover a truth far more complex and disturbing than she had imagined. A truth that would forever change the destiny of everyone involved in this story. The chaos that followed lasted only seconds, but it felt like an eternity. Clarissa fought furiously, her strength surprising for someone of her stature. In the midst of the confusion, Deborah felt a violent blow to her face, sending her staggering backward, dangerously close to the edge of the cliff. Richard shouted, trying to reach her. Time seemed to slow, as Deborah felt the ground disappear beneath her feet, her body tipping precariously over the abyss. In her eyes was reflected the same terror that Caroline must have felt in that very spot. But then a firm hand gripped her wrist, not Richard's, who was still struggling with Clarissa, but Edward's. The lawyer, in a moment of unexpected redemption, had lunged to help her instead of trying to escape. "Hold on," he yelled, pulling her back to safety as the police finally subdued Clarissa. Minutes later, the scene had transformed. Clarissa, handcuffed, was being led to a police car, still shouting incoherent accusations at everyone. Edward, also detained but cooperative, was giving an initial statement to one of the investigators. Deborah, Richard, and Sophia were led to a separate vehicle, blankets over their shoulders, as is protocol for victims of traumatic situations. "How did you find us so quickly?" Deborah asked the officer, taking her preliminary statement. "A man named Anthony Nash contacted the station with precise information," the officer replied. "He mentioned something about a flash drive with evidence of financial crimes and possible involvement in a fatal accident. That was enough for us to mobilize a team immediately." Deborah smiled, mentally thanking her friend for his efficiency. She looked over at Sophia, who was sitting in the back of the car with her father, her small body still trembling slightly, but her face showing perceptible relief. "She was very brave," Deborah commented, gesturing discreetly toward the girl. "Kids often are," the officer replied with a tired smile, "more than they should have to be." In the weeks that followed, events unfolded with the speed typical of scandals involving public figures. The case made headlines in every newspaper. Miami executive accused of premeditated murder and financial fraud. Child key witness in death case reopened after 2 years. Businessman Richard Foster cooperates with investigation into embezzlement at his own company. Edward Vance, in exchange for a reduced sentence, confessed his involvement in the financial scheme and the cover-up of evidence in the Atlanta case. He provided crucial details about how Clarissa had systematically manipulated situations and people for years to achieve her goals. For Sophia, however, the major legal events were secondary. Her life had transformed in more immediate and tangible ways. The first change was moving to a new house. Richard sold the mansion where they had lived with Clarissa, deeming it too laden with painful memories. They chose a smaller, cozier house near the sea in a quiet neighborhood. Sophia's room was decorated in shades of yellow and green, her favorite colors, And an entire bookshelf was dedicated to the storybooks she loved so much, including, in a place of honor, the special volume that had belonged to her mother. The second change was the constant presence of Mrs. Elia, rehired not just as a cook, but promoted to house manager. The woman, with her simple wisdom and genuine affection, became an essential figure in rebuilding the family's routine. Therapy continued, now in joint sessions with her father and individually for Sophia. Dr. Mariana had explained that the process would be long, that traumas of that magnitude don't resolve overnight, but that there was already significant progress. She's processing her grief in a healthier way now, the psychologist explained, during a meeting with the multidisciplinary team following the case. She can talk about her mother without the guilt she carried before, and she's starting to build a new age-appropriate understanding of what happened. Deborah, who remained professionally involved in the case, but had also developed a special bond with Sophia, visited them regularly. On one such visit, she found the girl in the garden of the new house, sitting under a mango tree similar to the one at the foster home, with a notebook in her lap. "What are you doing, Sophia?" she asked, sitting beside her on the grass. "Writing stories," the girl replied with a small smile, "like the ones Mom used to read to me. Can I see?" Sophia hesitated for a moment before handing over the notebook. The pages contained colorful drawings and text in careful, childish handwriting. Deborah flipped through it carefully, noticing that all the stories followed a similar pattern: a princess who faced dangers and difficulties, but always found help from loyal friends and had a happy ending. "They're beautiful. Sophia," she praised sincerely, "you have a lot of talent." "Dad said Mom used to write stories when she was young too," Sophia commented, taking the notebook back. "He found some of her old notebooks when we were moving." "That's a lovely way to feel connected to her," Deborah observed. Sophia nodded, her face taking on an expression surprisingly mature for her 7 years. "Aunt Deborah, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetie. Do you think Mom would be happy with us now? With our new house, with the stories I'm writing?" Deborah felt a lump in her throat, moved by the depth of the question. "I'm absolutely sure she would, Sophia. Your mother loved you more than anything in the world. Seeing you safe, creative, starting to be happy again, it would be everything she could ever wish for." The girl smiled, seemingly satisfied with the answer. She turned her attention back to the notebook, adding more color to one of the drawings. Richard joined them shortly after, bringing a tray with juice and cookies. He sat on the grass next to Sophia, watching her drawing with genuine interest. "What part of the story is this, Princess?" "This is when Princess Sophia finally reaches the safe castle, after all the dangerous adventures," the girl explained, pointing to the colorful figures on the paper. "See, this is you, this is Aunt Deborah, this is Mrs. Elia, and here," she pointed to a figure floating among the clouds, "is Mom, watching from far away and protecting everyone." Deborah and Richard exchanged an emotional look over the girl's head. There was so much in that simple drawing: pain, hope, resilience, the childish yet profound understanding of an irreparable loss, and at the same time the ability to move forward. "It's perfect. Sophia," Richard commented, his voice slightly choked. "I think that's exactly how things are." That afternoon, as she watched father and daughter interact with a naturalness that had been stolen from them for so long, Deborah reflected on the infinite forms that evil and goodness could take in the world. She thought of Clarissa, whose unbridled ambition led her to unthinkable acts, of Edward, who found redemption at a crucial moment, of Richard, blinded by guilt but finally able to see the truth, and of Sophia, small but incredibly strong, able to face her own fear to protect those she loved. She thought, above all, of the responsibility we all have to protect the most vulnerable, not just with laws and institutions, but with constant attention, with the courage to question perfect appearances, with the willingness to believe the improbable when the signs point in that direction. The sun began to set over Miami, casting a golden glow on the garden where they sat. Sophia had fallen asleep in her father's lap, her story notebook still clutched to her chest. "She's going to be okay, isn't she?" Richard asked in a low voice, gently stroking his sleeping daughter's hair. Deborah looked at Sophia's serene face, so different from the terrified one she had first seen at that charity event months ago. "She will," she answered with conviction. "Children have an incredible capacity for healing when they receive the right support." She has you, she has Mrs. Elia, she has therapy, she has friends, and she has her mother's memories, which can now be preserved and honored in the right way. Richard nodded, his eyes reflecting the last glimmer of the setting sun. And she has you, Deborah. I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done for us. You don't have to thank me, she replied sincerely. Seeing Sophia like this, seeing you reconnected with her, that's the most important work I can do. As night fell gently over the garden, bringing with it the sound of the first cicadas, Deborah felt a peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. Sophia's case had been one of the most difficult of her career, confronting her with the darkest aspects of human nature, but also with the incredible capacity for recovery that exists in each of us. Tomorrow there would be more work, more children needing help, more families in crisis. But for today, in this moment, there was just this small victory, a child sleeping peacefully, free from fear, beginning to rewrite her own story, no longer as a victim, but as the hero she had always been, and for Deborah, that was more than enough. As she drove home that night, through the illuminated streets of Miami, Deborah thought of all the Sophias still out there, silent in their suffering, waiting for someone to pay attention, for someone to believe, for someone to act. Renewed by this victory, she felt strengthened to continue her mission. One case at a time, one child at a time, because, as Sophia had written in her story, even the longest journey begins with a single brave step, and sometimes all it takes to change a child's destiny is a single attentive glance at the right moment. 3 years had passed since those turbulent days. Miami remained the same city of contrasts. The deep blue of the sea against the sunny sky, the wealth of luxury waterfront condos, and the simplicity of communities on the mainland, the joy of tourists on the beaches, and the daily struggle of workers on crowded buses. Deborah Santana, now the regional coordinator for the Specialized Social Services Center, crossed the courtyard of Our Lady of Grace School on a Wednesday morning. She wore a simple but elegant navy blue suit and carried a folder of documents. Her hair, once always tied in a practical bun, now fell in soft curls over her shoulders, small external changes that reflected deeper transformations in her life. Sophia's case, as it had become known among her professional colleagues, had become a landmark in her career. After the conclusion of Clarissa Foster's trial, sentenced to 30 years for first-degree murder, attempted murder, financial fraud, and several other crimes, Deborah became a national authority on identifying and intervening in cases of violence against children in high-net-worth families, a topic often rendered invisible by the aura of perfection that money and social status tend to create. She had written articles, participated in conferences, helped develop new protocols, but none of that compared to the satisfaction she felt in moments like the one she was about to experience. Aunt Deborah, the cheerful voice of Sophia, now 10 years old, rang out across the schoolyard. The girl ran toward her, her curly hair bouncing freely, her school uniform impeccable, a colorful backpack on her shoulders. Deborah opened her arms, receiving the girl's warm hug. "You look so beautiful, Sophia. You've grown so much since I last saw you." "It's only been 2 months," Sophia laughed, adjusting the reading glasses she now wore, a new detail that made her look strangely like Caroline in the photos Deborah had seen. 2 months is a long time in the life of a girl who's growing so fast, Deborah replied, stroking her hair. "How are classes? Your dad told me you were selected for the state literary contest." Sophia's face lit up. "Yes, my story, The Princess Who Saved Herself, was one of the finalists. The awards ceremony is next Saturday. Will you be able to come?" "I wouldn't miss it for the world," Deborah assured her. "I've already blocked it out on my calendar." They walked together toward the school gate, where Richard was waiting, leaning against his car. No longer the luxurious executive vehicle from before, but a simpler, more practical model. He waved as he saw them approaching. "Punctual as always," he commented, smiling at Deborah. "Sophia has been talking about you all day." "Dad," the girl protested, blushing slightly. "It was a surprise." Richard laughed, affectionately ruffling his daughter's hair. "Sorry, Princess. I forgot it was a secret." The dynamic between father and daughter had completely transformed in recent years. After the trauma and initial recovery, Richard had reoriented all his priorities. He sold the tech company, founding in its place an institution focused on developing free educational software for public schools. He began working predominantly from home, adapting his schedule to his daughters. In his words during one of the family therapy sessions Deborah attended, "I wasted too much time chasing success while what really mattered was right in front of me." "So, are we all ready for the big day?" Deborah asked, helping Sophia place her backpack on the back seat of the car. "I think so," Richard replied, a slight tension in his voice. "At least as ready as we can be." The big day they were referring to was the inauguration of the Caroline Allen Cultural Center, a project conceived by Richard and Sophia as a way to honor Caroline's memory. Located in a restored old mansion in the Art Deco historic district, the center would offer free cultural programs for children in vulnerable situations, with a special focus on literature and the arts. Deborah got into the car, sitting in the passenger seat while Richard took the wheel. Sophia settled in the back, immediately pulling a book from her backpack, her constant habit. "Have you checked if everything is in order for the ceremony?" Deborah asked as they drove away from the school. Richard nodded. "Anthony is taking care of the last legal details, but everything is on track. The workshops start next week, and we already have over 100 children enrolled. And I'm going to help with the storytelling classes on Saturdays," Sophia added from the back seat, without looking up from her book. "Mrs. Alir is going to make cakes for the kids' snack time." Deborah smiled, thinking about how that simple idea had blossomed. It all began when Sophia, at 8, asked her father what they could do so that other children could have access to the books that had helped her so much during difficult times. From a book donation, the idea evolved into a complete cultural project, involving not only literature but also music, theater, and visual arts. The drive to the Art Deco district was peaceful, filled with Sophia's excited chatter about her favorite books and the new friends she had made at school. When they finally parked near the historic mansion, Deborah once again admired the transformation of the space. The old colonial-style building, with its facade in shades of yellow and blue, had been carefully restored, preserving its historic features while adapting the interior for its new functions. Large windows allowed natural light to flood in, and the inner courtyard had been transformed into a small reading garden, with comfortable benches under leafy trees. Anthony Nash was waiting for them at the entrance, nervously checking his watch. 3 years of working together on the case had turned the initially skeptical lawyer into a close friend and constant partner in the social projects that emerged after Sophia's case. "Finally," he exclaimed upon seeing them. "I thought you'd gotten lost." "The reporters are already arriving and the mayor has confirmed her attendance at the ceremony." Richard placed a reassuring hand on his friend's shoulder. "Breathe, Tony. Everything's under control. We still have an hour before the officials start." They entered the building together, where a small team of staff was finalizing preparations. In the main hall, a photographic exhibition featured images of Caroline at different moments in her life, as a student, as a professional, but mostly as a mother, always with Sophia by her side. The girl stopped in front of one particular photo, Caroline sitting on the sand at the beach, hugging a Sophia of about 4 years old, both laughing at the camera. The Miami Ocean in the background. "This is my favorite," Sophia commented, gently touching the frame. "It was on my 4th birthday. I remember Mom had made a chocolate cake and brought it for us to eat on the beach, even though Dad thought it was crazy." Richard came closer, putting an arm around his daughter's shoulders. "Your mother always said that rules are important, but that some exist only to be broken once in a while. Especially on the birthdays of special people." Deborah watched the scene with a warm heart. That family's healing process had been long and at times painful, but moments like this confirmed that the path they had chosen was the right one. Sophia had not just survived the trauma. She had grown through it, transforming pain into something meaningful. "I'm going to check the final details in the library," Anthony announced, consulting his list. "Sophia, want to come with me? Some new books arrived that I think you'll like." The girl nodded enthusiastically, following the lawyer to the 2nd floor, leaving Deborah and Richard alone in the hall. "Nervous?" she asked, noticing the tension in his posture. "A little," Richard admitted, running a hand through his hair, a gesture Deborah had learned to recognize as a sign of anxiety. Not about the event itself, but about what it represents. It's like closing a chapter, Honoring Caroline in the right way, turning something so tragic into something positive. You've done an incredible job, Richard. Caroline would be proud. He smiled, a melancholic but genuine smile. I hope so. Sometimes I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking about how blind I was, how I didn't see what was happening right under my nose. You can't blame yourself forever, Deborah replied gently. Clarissa was manipulative and extremely skilled at hiding her true nature. And more importantly, when the truth came out, you made the right choice. You protected Sophia. Richard nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the photographs on the wall. I had help. Your help, mainly. Deborah felt a slight blush rise to her cheeks. In the 3 years since the case, her relationship with Richard had evolved from a professional partnership to a solid friendship, and more recently, to something neither of them had yet fully defined. Casual meetings to discuss Sophia's progress had become regular dinners. Conversations about therapy had evolved into discussions about literature, music, philosophy. Professional messages had turned into daily good mornings and late-night conversations that stretched into the early hours. I was just doing my job, she replied, trying to maintain her professional composure, aware of the staff passing by, preparing for the event. Richard smiled, clearly noticing her discomfort. So your job was to protect Sophia. I'm not sure rebuilding my life was also in the job description. Before Deborah could respond, they were interrupted by Mrs. Elliot, who bustled into the hall carrying a covered tray. I finally found you, exclaimed the woman, her hair now completely grey but with the same energy as always. Sophia told me to bring this before the guests started arriving. She uncovered the tray, revealing a homemade chocolate pie, decorated with fresh strawberries. In the center, written in white frosting, were the words, "Thank you for saving my story." Deborah felt tears well up in her eyes. She did this? With my hands, but the recipe and the idea were hers, Mrs. Elliot confirmed with pride. She said it was a special surprise for the two most important adults in her life, after her mother. Richard also seemed moved, looking at the pie with a trembling smile. Caroline used to make a pie just like this. It was Sophia's favorite. It's her recipe, Mrs. Elliot confirmed. The girl found it in an old notebook and asked me to teach her. We practiced 3 times until it was perfect. The buzz at the entrance announced the arrival of the first guests. Mrs. Elliot hurried to take the pie to the kitchen, promising to save it for a more private moment after the ceremony. The next few hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. The official inauguration ceremony was attended by city officials, representatives from child protection NGOs, and important figures from the Miami cultural scene. Speeches were made, ribbons were cut, applause echoed through the historic mansion. But the moment that touched Deborah the most was when Sophia went up to the small makeshift stage to read an excerpt from her award-winning story. Dressed in a simple yellow dress, Caroline's favorite color, the girl spoke with a surprising confidence for her 10 years. And so, Princess Sophia realized she didn't need to wait for a rescue. She had within herself all the courage needed to face her fears. With the help of loyal friends, and carrying in her heart the lessons of her mother, the queen who now shone among the stars, she found her own way through the dark forest. The audience listened in respectful silence, many visibly moved by the maturity and depth of the text, especially considering the real story behind those words. At the end of the reading, the round of applause was deafening. Sophia gave a small curtsy and came down from the stage, running directly into the arms of Deborah and Richard, who were waiting for her in the front row. A group hug sealed the moment, captured by dozens of camera flashes, an image that, unbeknownst to them, would grace the covers of Miami newspapers the next day, symbolizing the spirit of resistance and hope that the new cultural center represented. After the official ceremony, when most of the guests had departed, a smaller, more intimate group gathered in the reading garden at the back of the mansion. Anthony Raphael, the journalist who had alerted Deborah to Clarissa's maneuvers years ago, Louisa Barton, Sophia's former teacher, who had been instrumental at the beginning of the case, Dr. Mariana, the psychologist who continued to follow the family, and a few other close friends shared a more private moment of celebration. Sophia had fallen asleep in one of the hammocks, strategically placed between the trees, exhausted after the emotional intensity of the day. Her storybook, no longer Caroline's original, now carefully preserved on a special shelf but a new edition with her own stories, rested open on her chest. "It's incredible to think about everything that's happened," Anthony commented, sipping a coffee while watching the sleeping girl peacefully. "When you called me that first night, Deborah, I never imagined where it would lead us." "Neither did I," Deborah admitted. "I thought it would be just another difficult case. I didn't know it would change my life too." Richard, sitting beside her on a wooden bench under a jaboticaba tree, smiled at the comment. "It seems Sophia has that effect on people. She changes lives just by existing." "Like her mother," observed Mrs. Elia, who was discreetly arranging some snacks on the table. "Caroline had that gift too. She'd walk into a room and light up everything around her." The conversation flowed smoothly as the evening progressed, mixing memories of the past with plans for the future. Raphael mentioned he was writing a book about the case, with names changed to protect Sophia, of course, focusing on the issue of invisible violence in elite families. Louisa shared that she had been promoted to pedagogical coordinator and was implementing awareness programs about signs of abuse in her school. Anthony talked about the expansion of his firm, now specializing in children's and adolescents' rights. Gradually, the guests began to say their goodbyes. Anthony was the last to leave, but not before confirming the final details for the weekend's literary contest. Only Deborah, Richard, Sophia still asleep, and Mrs. Elia remained, who insisted on finishing organizing the kitchen before accepting a ride home. "She looks like an angel when she sleeps," Deborah commented, watching Sophia in the hammock. "It's hard to imagine she's the same girl who faces the world with such determination when she's awake." Richard smiled, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the garden lights. "Sometimes when I see her like this, I still feel that pang of guilt for everything she had to go through." "Children are resilient," Deborah replied, gently placing her hand on his on the bench, "more than we imagine." And Sophia had something that many children in similar situations don't have. People who believed in her, who acted, who didn't give up even when it seemed impossible. People like you. Deborah felt the warmth rise to her face again. After 3 years, she still hadn't gotten used to the intensity of Richard's gaze when he looked at her like that. "Like all of us," she corrected. "It was a collective effort." Richard turned his hand under hers, intertwining their fingers. "Do you know what Sophia asked me last night, before she went to sleep?" "What?" "She asked when I was finally going to get the courage to officially ask you out." A shy smile played on his lips. "Apparently our weekly dinners aren't as discreet as we thought." Deborah laughed softly, feeling a mix of embarrassment and joy. "And what did you say?" "That I was waiting for the right moment." He hesitated, his gaze becoming more serious. "Deborah, I know there are complications. Our relationship started in an unconventional way, with you acting professionally in my family's case. I know there are ethical issues, protocols. The case was officially closed over 2 years ago," she interrupted gently. "And Sophia now has follow-up with other professionals. There's no conflict of interest. So the only obstacle is ourselves." He smiled, squeezing her hand lightly. "Our own caution?" Deborah reflected for a moment. For years she had dedicated herself completely to her work, building walls around her heart after painful experiences in Chicago. Sophia's case had started as just another professional challenge, but it had ended up becoming a journey of personal rediscovery. "Maybe it's time for us to be brave," she finally answered, returning the squeeze. "Like Sophia taught us to be." The sound of approaching footsteps made them pull apart slightly, like teenagers caught in the act. Mrs. Elia appeared at the garden entrance, her eyebrows raised in an expression that mixed surprise and satisfaction. "I've finished in the kitchen," she announced, a mischievous smile playing on her lips. "I'm ready to go, but I can wait a little longer if you two need more time." Richard laughed, getting up from the bench. "That won't be necessary, Mrs. Elia. We were just leaving too." While Richard gently picked up Sophia, still asleep in his arms, Deborah helped Mrs. Elia gather the last few items. The older woman took the opportunity to whisper, "It was about time, my dear. That girl needs a complete family again." Deborah's heart sped up at the comment. "Mrs. Elia, we were just—" "You don't need to explain to this old woman," the lady interrupted with a wise smile. "I know loving gazes when I see them. And I'm sure Caroline would approve. She always said life is too short to postpone happiness. Before Deborah could reply, Richard returned with Sophia in his arms, now partially awake, murmuring sleepily. "Dad, is the party over?" "It is, Princess. We're going home." "Is Aunt Deborah coming with us?" Richard looked questioningly at Deborah, a silent invitation in his eyes. "I am, sweetie," she replied, feeling a quiet certainty settle in her heart. "We're all going together." As they walked to the car under the starry Miami sky, Sophia, still half asleep on her father's shoulder, murmured something that made Deborah stop for a moment. "Moved. I knew it would have a happy ending, just like in Mum's stories." And on that quiet night, as the Caroline Allen Cultural Center closed its doors after the first day of a long and promising journey, something new began to blossom. Not to erase the past, but to honor it. Not to replace what was lost, but to create new meanings from transformed pain. Because, as Sophia had written in her award-winning story, true courage is not in not feeling fear, but in moving forward even when fear seems bigger than us. And perhaps that was the greatest lesson of this whole story. That life, even after its most devastating storms, always holds the possibility of new beginnings. That night, under the stars of Miami, 4 different people, united by tragedy, but strengthened by love and courage, took the first step together in a new story. A story that, like all the best stories, did not erase the scars of the past, but transformed them into marks of honor, silent witnesses to battles won and paths walked with dignity. And Sophia, half asleep in the back seat of the car as they traveled through the illuminated city streets, smiled in her sleep. Because somehow she had always known that her story, the real one, not the one from nightmares, would end like this. Not with a perfect, nuance-free happily ever after, but with a we move forward together, stronger and wiser, that in the end was the truest kind of happiness one could find in this imperfect and wonderful world. 2 years had passed since the inauguration of the Caroline Allen Cultural Center. The institution, which had started as a small family project, now served over 300 children in Miami, with programs ranging from literacy and academic support to workshops in theater, music, and visual arts. It was so successful that branches were beginning to open in other cities in Florida, carrying Caroline's legacy beyond the capital. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon, typical of a Florida summer. The backyard of the waterfront house in Coconut Grove was decorated with colorful balloons and ribbons that danced in the breeze coming off the ocean. A banner strung between 2 mango trees announced, "Happy 12th birthday, Sophia." Deborah watched the scene from the porch, a serene smile on her face as she adjusted the light cotton dress she had chosen for the occasion. Beside her, Mrs. Elliot meticulously arranged a tray of snacks. "Do you think she'll like the surprise?" the older woman asked, giving Deborah a conspiratorial look. "I'm sure she will," Deborah replied, checking her watch once more. "Richard should be arriving with her any minute." The movie ends at 3. The sound of excited voices at the gate confirmed her prediction. Sophia entered the garden, chatting animatedly with her father about the film they had just seen. Walking beside her was Juliana, her inseparable friend from the foster home days, now a 13-year-old teenager with colorful braids and a shy smile. "Surprise!" shouted in unison the nearly 30 people strategically hidden around the garden, emerging from behind trees, chairs, and tables. Sophia froze for a moment, her eyes wide with shock, before a radiant smile lit up her face. "You tricked me," she accused, looking at her father with mock indignation. "I knew you were up to something." Richard held up his hands in surrender. Guilty. But the whole idea was Deborah's. Sophia ran to hug her stepmother, now officially part of the family for just over a year. The wedding had been a simple ceremony on the beach, with few guests and Sophia as the main flower girl, carrying the rings in a small hollowed-out book specially prepared for the occasion. "Thank you, Mum Deborah," Sophia exclaimed, using the term she had spontaneously adopted a few months after the wedding. "It's perfect." Deborah returned the hug, feeling that familiar wave of love and gratitude that washed over her whenever Sophia called her that. She had never imagined she would be a mother, especially after everything she had been through in Chicago. But life had its own plans, its winding paths that, surprisingly, sometimes led exactly where we needed to be. Happy birthday, my little writer, Deborah replied, pulling back to admire the near teenager before her. Sophia had grown so much in the last 2 years, not just physically but in maturity and confidence. Her eyes, once often haunted by shadows of fear, now sparkled with the natural curiosity of her age. Come on, there's a special surprise waiting for you inside, Deborah said, leading Sophia by the hand toward the house. In the living room, decorated with more balloons and photographs of the birthday girl over the years, waited a gift too large to be wrapped, an antique dark wood desk restored and polished to a shine, with a comfortable chair and a small golden plaque on the front that read, "For Sophia Allen Foster, where dreams become stories." "It was your mother, Caroline's," explained Richard, who had entered quietly behind them. "I found it stored at your maternal grandparents' house. It's where she wrote her first stories, when she was about your age." Sophia stood in silence, delicately running her fingers over the surface of the wood, as if she could feel the presence of her biological mother through it. Her emotions were visible on her expressive face: surprise, emotion, a touch of melancholy, and predominantly gratitude. "I thought it would be perfect for your new room," Deborah continued, referring to the family's recent move to a larger house, where Sophia now had her own space, with a small balcony overlooking the sea. "For your new books." Sophia had become a prolific writer for her age. Her story, The Princess Who Saved Herself, had not only won the state contest 2 years prior, but had also been published in a national collection of young authors. Since then, she dedicated at least an hour every day to writing, developing stories that often reflected, in subtle and symbolic ways, her own experiences. "It's the best gift in the world," she finally declared, hugging her father first and then Deborah. "Can I use it today?" "I have an idea for a new story." After the party, Deborah laughed. "Your friends are waiting in the garden, and Mrs. Elia made your favorite chocolate and strawberry cake." The mention of cake was enough to lure Sophia back to the celebration in the garden, where friends from school, classmates from the cultural center workshops, and some family members were waiting. Among them was Anthony, accompanied by his new wife, Louisa, Sophia's former teacher, who, after years of friendship with the lawyer during the case, had finally given in to his persistent dinner invitations. Raphael, the journalist, was also present, carrying a copy of his newly released book, Shadows in Glass Houses, which addressed cases of abuse in elite families, using Sophia's case, with names and details changed, as the narrative's backbone. The book had become an important catalyst for discussions on the topic across the country. The party unfolded with the typical joy of children's celebrations, mixed with moments of deeper emotion that reflected the extraordinary journey of that family. When it was time for the cake, everyone gathered around the central table. Sophia closed her eyes for a long moment before blowing out the candles as if making a particularly important wish. "What did you wish for?" Juliana asked later, as the two shared a generous slice of cake in the shade of an almond tree. "I can't tell, or it won't come true," Sophia replied with a mysterious smile. "But it has to do with the surprise I'm preparing for my dad and mom Deborah's wedding anniversary." Deborah, who was passing by with a tray of sodas, pretended not to hear, but felt a wave of curiosity. Their first wedding anniversary was just a few weeks away, and Sophia had mentioned several times that she was preparing something special. Later, when the last guests had departed, and the sun began to set on the horizon, painting the Miami sky in shades of orange and pink, the family gathered on the small private beach in front of the house. Richard had lit a modest bonfire in the sand, around which they placed beach chairs. Sophia, still too excited to think about sleep, played at the water's edge with Max, the chocolate Labrador who had joined the family 6 months earlier. "Perfect day," Richard commented, handing Deborah a glass of white wine before sitting down beside her. "Did you see her face when you showed her the desk?" "It was magical," Deborah agreed, leaning back in her chair with a contented sigh. "I had a brilliant idea to look up Caroline's parents. Actually, it was Sophia's suggestion. She asked about her maternal grandparents a few months ago, said she wanted to get to know them better." Richard took a sip of his own glass. "They were so moved by the idea of being part of her life again. I think they needed that reconnection too. The relationship with Caroline's parents had been strained after her death, with veiled accusations and unexpressed resentments complicating everyone's grief. Only in recent months, with Sophia expressing a desire to learn more about her maternal roots, had a rapprochement begun. "Are they coming for dinner on Thursday?" Deborah asked. Richard nodded. They confirmed this morning. Sophia is excited to show them the draft of her new book. The girl had begun working on a more ambitious project, a young adult novel about a girl who discovers her deceased mother's diary and, through it, embarks on a journey of self-discovery. It was, of course, inspired by her own experiences, but transformed by the fertile imagination of a preteen who had found in writing a way to process her emotions. "Look, Dad." "Mom, Deborah," Sophia called from the water's edge, pointing to the horizon where the moon was beginning to rise, large and silver, over the ocean. "Isn't it the most beautiful thing in the world?" "The second most beautiful," Richard replied, looking not at the sky but at his daughter, illuminated by the last glow of the sun and the first rays of the moon. "Nothing beats you, Princess." Sophia rolled her eyes with the typical exaggeration of a preteen, but her smile betrayed the pleasure she took in the compliment. "You guys are so cheesy," she teased, running back toward the bonfire with Max at her heels. "I'm going to get the marshmallows to roast, okay?" "Of course," Deborah agreed. "They're in the kitchen drawer." As Sophia ran to the house, Deborah felt Richard's hand find hers in the dimness between the chairs. "Have you ever stopped to think about how we got here?" he asked, his voice carrying that note of contemplation that occasionally surfaced, especially in moments like this. "If someone had told me 5 years ago." "Life has strange paths," Deborah completed, lacing her fingers with his. "Sometimes the worst moments lead us to the best places." Richard brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "Do you still think we should tell her about the baby today? Or should we wait a little longer?" Deborah instinctively brought her free hand to her stomach, still completely flat. The pregnancy, discovered only 2 weeks earlier, was still a secret kept just between the couple. At just over 8 weeks, they had decided to wait until the end of the first trimester to announce it publicly, but the question of when to tell Sophia hung between them. "I think today would be perfect," Deborah decided after a moment of reflection, "at the end of her birthday like an extra gift. It shows we're not trying to overshadow her celebration, but including her in something new and special." Richard nodded, visibly relieved by the decision. "Do you think she'll react well?" "I'm almost certain she will. She's mentioned several times that she'd like to have a brother or sister." Deborah smiled, remembering Sophia's increasingly frequent questions about, "When are you guys going to give me a little brother?" Besides, Sophia has a huge heart. The more people to love, the better for her. As if summoned by the conversation, Sophia came running back, carrying a bag of marshmallows, crackers, and chocolate bars to make s'mores, a tradition Richard had brought back from his trips to the United States, and that had become a family ritual on bonfire nights. "I found everything," she announced triumphantly, dumping the contents of the bag onto a towel spread on the sand. "And I brought extra chocolate, because there's no such thing as too much chocolate, right?" Deborah and Richard exchanged a knowing look, a shared smile that spoke of sweet secrets and bright futures. "Sophia," Richard began, helping his daughter arrange the ingredients, "your mom Deborah and I have something to tell you." The girl looked at them with curiosity, her large eyes reflecting the orange glow of the bonfire. "What is it? Is it something good or bad?" "Very good," Deborah assured her, moving to sit beside her stepdaughter on the towel. "At least we hope you'll think it's as good as we do." "Is it about the cultural center? Are you opening another branch?" Sophia had become deeply involved in the project, actively participating in the literary workshops and helping to plan new programs. "No, it's something more personal," Richard explained, sitting on the other side of his daughter, forming a small, intimate circle around the bonfire. "Something that's going to change our family." Sophia's eyes widened slightly, a shadow of worry crossing them. Years of therapy had helped enormously, but occasionally traces of the old fear of change and loss still surfaced. "Change how?" "Sophia," Deborah took the girl's hand in hers, her voice soft and steady. "Your father and I are going to have a baby. You're going to have a brother or a sister." For a moment, Sophia was absolutely still, processing the information. Then slowly a smile began to form on her face, growing until it transformed into an expression of pure joy. "A baby? For real? When?" Is it a boy or a girl? Can I pick the name? Where will its room be? Can I help decorate? The questions poured out in a rapid succession, barely leaving time for answers. Richard laughed, relieved and moved by the enthusiastic reaction. Easy, Princess. One question at a time. The baby will be born in about 7 months. We don't know if it's a boy or a girl yet. It's too early for that. As for the name and the room's decoration, of course we want your opinion. You'll be the big sister, Deborah added, feeling tears of happiness welling in her eyes. An important responsibility. I'm going to be the best big sister in the world, Sophia declared with solemn determination. I'll teach the baby everything, how to read, how to write stories, how to make sandcastles. She paused, a new idea lighting up her face. Can I write a special book just for him? To read when he's born? That's a wonderful idea, Deborah approved, hugging her. And can I tell Juliana? And Grandpa and Grandma Allen? And Mrs. Elia? And Uncle Anthony and Aunt Louisa? The excitement visibly grew with each new person Sophia imagined sharing the news with. We can start telling everyone tomorrow, Richard suggested. Today we wanted you to be the first to know, because you are the most important person in this story. Sophia was silent for a moment, absorbing the weight of those words. Then, to their surprise, she knelt on the sand and gently placed her hand on Deborah's stomach. Hi, baby, she whispered seriously. This is your sister Sophia. You have no idea how lucky you are. Our family is a little crazy sometimes, but it's full of love. And there are stories, lots of stories. I can't wait to tell you all of them. Deborah felt the tears stream freely now, unable to contain her emotion at the gesture. Richard also seemed to be fighting the lump in his throat. There's one more thing, Sophia continued, still talking to the belly. You're going to have 2 moms, you know. Mom Deborah, who's carrying you now, and Mommy Caroline, who's in the stars. She watches over all of us from up there. So you will never, ever be alone. At that moment, as if in response to the girl's words, a shooting star streaked across the Miami night sky, leaving a silver trail over the ocean. The 3 of them watched in respectful silence, each making their own silent wish to the universe. You know what that means, right? Sophia finally asked, her voice filled with childish conviction. It's Mommy Caroline sending a message. She's happy for us. Deborah and Richard didn't argue. There were things in this world that went beyond rational understanding. Connections that transcended time and space, forms of love that not even the most painful departure could sever. I think you're right. Sophia, Deborah agreed, hugging the girl and feeling Richard join the embrace, forming a perfect circle around the small life growing inside her. Your mother Caroline would be very, very proud of you. Of the incredible woman you're becoming. And of the family we've built together, Richard added, his voice carrying that unique mix of gratitude and wonder that comes when we realize that, against all odds, we've found our way home. There, on the beach in Coconut Grove, under the starry Miami sky, with the sound of the waves as a soundtrack and the warmth of the bonfire warding off the night breeze, a family celebrated not just a birthday or a new life on the way, but something even more precious, the journey that had brought them there, with all its pains, struggles, revelations, and finally redemption. Sophia, sensing the solemnity of the moment, but unable to contain her exuberant nature for long, suggested, so how about we roast those marshmallows now? After all, we're celebrating. My birthday, the baby, our family, everything. As Richard helped his daughter prepare the makeshift skewers, and Deborah organized the crackers and chocolate, a sense of completeness hung over them. Not the false perfection that Clarissa had strived so hard to project, but a real happiness built on hard truths, sincere forgiveness and unconditional love. And when Sophia bit into her perfectly toasted s'more, the melting chocolate smudging her chin, her firelit smile held all the promise of a future that, while uncertain as all futures are, would be faced with courage, together. You know, she said after swallowing the sweet treat, I think this is the best story we could have ever written. Deborah smiled, affectionately running a hand through the girl's hair. And we still have many chapters ahead. The best ones, Sophia agreed with the absolute certainty that only children possess. The best ones are yet to come. And under the starry Miami sky, 3 hearts, soon to be 4, beat in a rhythm of renewed hope as the story continued to be written, 1 page at a time.